Hello and welcome. I am your host of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Author Karen E. Osborne. I have five novels out. The latest is Justice for Emerson. I am so glad that you're here. This is a space for readers and writers to come together and talk about books. I am so happy to introduce you to our very special guest today. She is an acclaimed, award-winning author, and I personally love her books. I only even heard about you. I don't know how that happened, Denny. Say hi to everybody. Hey, Denny.
Hi, how are you doing? This is Denny here. And
Hey.
don't let me start talking now because
All
I'll run
right.
my.
Well, we're going to get you talking in 1 minute. So
Okay.
I just want to tell you a little bit about her. So about her latest book, The Trial of Mrs. Rhinelander. But
Mhm.
of course, she's working on something now, but we'll hear about that. She's a best-selling, award-winning author of historical fiction, a former dancer, and public relations professional. Denny is also an adjunct professor in the MFA program at Drexel University. She is a book critic for NPR, all right, and a
Oh,
freelance writer whose work has appeared in USA Today and Harper's Bazaar. So we're
mhm.
so happy to have you. I know my audience is thrilled to meet you and hear about your books. Start with your writing journey. How did
Uh,
you go from dancer to public relations professional to award-winning author?
that could take up about 20 minutes because it is a lengthy story, but I'm gonna cut to the chase. First, I started as I was a dancer and it was fabulous. It was a great career. But I turned into a professional marketing and PR diva and ended up running my own company, a event management company. And what I would do to relax at the end of a very long day and traveling all over the country and et cetera, was that I used to write fan fiction. It's relaxing and fun. And I was in a fandom called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I was writing about vampires and all sorts of fun stuff. Well, that introduced me to a whole bunch of people online who were writers. And some of them were actually romance writers, quite a few at the time. And one of them invited me to join her at an upcoming conference, a Romance Writers of America conference. I went, had a blast, hung out for a long time, learned a lot about writing books. And then a decade or so later, because I was really busy with running my business, I decided to stop running my business and start writing original fiction. And that led me to my first contract with Kensington Books. And I wrote a book called Wild Women in the Blues that got a lot of attention, sold a lot of copies, and was very, very excited about that novel. So that's shorthand for my journey to where I
Sounds
am
That
today.
sounds pretty cool. Before I got published, my husband and I owned our own company, consulting, a
Yeah.
consulting firm, and did that. And it was very hard to get the writing in, wasn't it? Yes.
Uh-huh.
So,
It was really hard. Hmm.
so historical fiction. I just love historical fiction. I didn't start writing historical fiction until my last book, but now I'm
Okay.
just hooked. But I do love reading it, do love reading it. And so, what's your style of research? Like, are you one of
Uh,
those people that digs, and then you start writing? Or you writing and thinking, uh-oh, I better find out if that really could happen? What do
well,
you do
yeah.
research?
And believe me, it is sometimes both, a mix of both. when my first novel took 6 years for me to write. And I think I was digging in rabbit holes that I never ever need to see again. Uh, because it was just forever lost in some place somewhere. But now that I'm under contract and always trying to create new works that hopefully will continue to sell, I have to be more focused. So I turn on my journalism background techniques. And that means primary and secondary research. That means a lot of digging through newspapers, archives, meeting and talking to archivists at libraries and museums, um, a lot of reading because you got to get your nonfiction, and that's all for the atmosphere, for the time period, for the
Yes.
facts of what's happening in that world, in that space that you're writing about. But that has nothing to do, well, it has a little bit to do, of course. But then there's the development of characters because people read books regardless of the genre because they want to connect with a character. And be it a historical figure that is someone that actually lived and their story is something I'm inspired by and inspired to fictionalize, or just having the background or the atmosphere of a certain time period and putting my fictional characters into that
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go there. So for the trial of Mrs. Rhinelander, right?
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about the setting and
Sure.
the time period and then the premise.
Absolutely. We're talking 1920s. New York City, primarily actually New Rochelle, right outside of New
Mm.
York City. And Fifth Avenue, think money, think Rockefellers, the Astors, the Gilded Age is done, but that money is still floating around. Okay, so we have a British immigrants, a family of British immigrants, well, the parents are immigrants, children born in the US of A, are living out in New Rochelle. And the one girl runs into a young man who happens to be the heir to a real estate fortune. And she's not that interested in that aspect of his life right off the bat. It's the 1920s. She's interested in having fun. She's interested in getting out of her daddy's house a little bit more often than he'd like because she's the middle sister of three. And these folks, and the story I'm telling here is all based on facts. This is not something made up. This was a headline news story back in the 1920s because after they have this great affair, which lasts about 3 years, after they get married, 2 weeks after they're married, he sues for annulment. And the grounds for that annulment is that she never mentioned to him that she was Negro. Well,
Mm.
that's intriguing to her because she didn't think she was. And from there, the story unfolds. And it's definitely was front page news all around the country. During the 1920s, the newspaper business was like TMZ and social media. All of the headlines were screaming, all of the headlines were crazy, especially in certain publications. Now, in the black press, they were really focused on civil rights, um, very much on reducing the violence of lynching and really telling some seriously front page news stories. At the same time, it was the style of the newspaper business at the time. So you had um, the Stokes monkey trial was big news across the land. Leopold and Loeb were two young men in Chicago who murdered a young boy and then had this intense trial that was news across the land. And so was the Rhinelander annulment case during this time.
Wow, wow, wow,
So
wow.
yeah.
So my book, True Grace, takes place in the 1920s, 1924, in Harlem, in
Okay.
Yonkers, in
Yeah.
New Rochelle.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay.
we have, yes,
So you know the
and
time period, you know the stuff that was happening. I've set
yes,
three of my books have been set in the 1920s.
it's a
Not
great
only
era.
Wild Women in the Blues is 1925 Chicago, In the Face of the Sun is 1928, but also it's a dual timeline. Also 1968. And then this story, 19, whatever I just said, 1920, begins in the 1920s. Is actually, it's another dual timeline, the Rhinelander book, 1920s, 1930s, and 1940, which is an
Wow.
important juxtaposition. So yeah, that book had, you talk about some rabbit holes on that book. All of
I'm
the
sure.
transcripts.
So
Oh
tell
my
us a little
goodness.
bit about Mrs. Rhinelander. What kind of person was she, besides being shocked that she was Black?
Yeah, no,
What
I'm
were some of
probably
her
using too much of an
qualities?
hyperbole there.
The ones you
Um,
like, the ones that you wish she'd fix?
well, it was a hard story initially to research because there was so much information to go through. There were so many articles and dissertations and
Mhm.
college theses written about this woman, her trial, I mean, what she went through, and really the court case. The court case was thoroughly examined because there are some really outrageous moments that occur. I don't want to give away the book. Of course, you can just go online and Google it, but there are some outrageous things that happened during that trial. But I took a different perspective in that I really wanted to focus on this young woman who starts out as a young woman and she lived until she didn't pass until 1990. Okay,
Mm,
so she lived to be 90. Um, and there's really not that much written about her after maybe 1945, something like that. If anything, there's very little written about her after the 1940, early 1940s. So I dug in and went through everything and I said, look at these news headlines. Look at the choices that are being made by her lawyer team and by her and by his team.
mm,
And then there's a lot of information because the other thing that existed were the love letters between them. So you're looking at all of this information, and I made a decision. I made a choice. What were they? Were they in love? Who was the obstacle? Was it him or was it his family? Did she know or didn't she know of her racial heritage? There were some who said she did, others who said she didn't. But I made
mm,
a choice so that I could tell a story about a woman I felt who was in love and then was victimized, not only because of the color of her skin, but also because of the way the news media treated her.
mm. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
what happens to you when you are abused by the news and you're no longer a headline? What happens to that type of woman? That
Yeah.
type of person, not even a woman. It's just like you see it so often with young superstars, if you will, and then something happens, and 10
You
years later, or 20,
crash.
they crash and burn. So, what is that like? So, I took a look at that, and I think I wrote a good book that tells a story about resistance, resilience,
Mm,
and love, and also racial disparities that existed during that time because part of the story has to do with the Brits. Her parents were British.
Hmm.
Her father was born in Jamaica. In Britain during the 1920s, they didn't have something called the one drop rule. That's American thinking and attitudes. So that's sort of the framework for it. I think it's an enjoyable read. It it has some stuff in it though. It has some
Sounds
stuff.
wonderful. My book, True Grace, was inspired by my grandmother, who was a mixed race woman. Her father was British, but they just treated her, once he was dead, they just kicked her out of the country. No,
Hmm.
no, yeah. So I don't know how benevolent our British our British folks were.
Well, I've
So you,
written two books that set place in Britain that had a lot to do with Britain. I shouldn't say takes place, but my ancestry is Jamaican, so that's West African and also British. And my father's side is Bermudan. I'm first generation Bermudan, and Bermuda is still a British province, so or territory. But it's a very interesting history. It's
history.
definitely
It is. It's a
definitely
very
interesting.
interesting history.
Mhm.
There was, I didn't want us to run out of time before I
Oh,
ask you
sure,
about
sure.
another one of your books that really intrigued me. I know you've written many, so I had to
I've
pick.
only written five.
That's still, yeah, we're the same
Okay.
boat, number five. But this one really just jumped out at me. So, a novel of Queen Victoria's
Yeah,
goddaughter.
right.
And according to Amazon, that's your number one bestseller. So I
Yes.
wonder if you could just briefly tell us a little bit about that one.
Sure, sure. I actually started to say some things about it because it is the book that is based in England and Africa, taking place or kicking off in the 1840s. It's my only so far 19th century book. And it's based on a true, very true documented story of a woman named Sarah Forbes Bonetta. Her original name, however, was Princess Anya. She was an African princess from a village in West Africa that was raided and eviscerated essentially by the Dahomey under King Gizo in the about 1841, 42, 43 in that time period. Her life included enslavement in his camp and eventual transportation to England, but it's during a time period, and sure, the British had stopped slavery in 1834, 30 some years before America, but nonetheless, the racism and the different types of hierarchy were evident throughout the society. She spent time in Africa, Sierra Leone, and other places. And back in England, she was part of the court, part of the royal court. So she has this conflicting background that is
Mm,
fascinating. There were also diaries, entries that she wrote. I had the opportunity to read her actual words, which is always fascinating
yes.
for a historical fiction author. And then there was two journals published in 1840 and 45 by a Lieutenant Commander Forbes, who was the British officer who spent a lot of time in Africa on behalf of the Queen and was the one who rescued her. And he wrote two huge journals about his travels to Africa, and one of them was primarily about her. So
Wow.
just talking about historical research and rabbit holes and all that good stuff, it's wonderful. It's an amazing story, an amazingly smart, powerful, interesting young woman. Some of my reviews, I smile and laugh, say that she was somewhat arrogant and didn't appreciate what the queen did for her. Well, no, she was too smart to just appreciate her circumstances. She had to deal with her circumstances, and survival and her brain were what worked best for her. Yes, it was nice to be in the royal court, but there were still challenges.
Course, of course. Wow. These are two amazing, amazing books. And she has five, folks. So you need to go and look at all five of her books. Before we
Yay.
go, this is what are you reading? What are you writing? So could
Oh,
you just give any book that you recently read or that you're reading now that you could recommend to our audience?
well, since the book critic in me is always reading something, I'll throw out a couple of titles that you got to be on the lookout for. Happy Land by Dolan Valdez. Now, all of her name is not with me right now by Dolan because I just call her Dolan. But check that one out. It's coming in April. There's one that's out right now called Harlem Rhapsody by
Yes,
Victoria Christopher Murray. Amazing book.
yes.
Another book by Nancy Johnson called People of Means. Another great story. Kennedy Ryan's third book in her trilogy is coming out. I just read a book by Allison Epstein called Fagin the Thief, which is a story about Dickens' Oliver Twist character, Fagin, gets the lead
Oh,
role treatment. It's an amazing book, absolutely
wow.
amazing. Um, oh, and I finished reading Four Winds, which is an older book by Christian Hanna that
I
I
love,
absolutely
love
loved.
that book.
I
That was
absolutely love
amazing.
that story.
Yeah.
But there's one coming that I'm reading now by S.A. Cosby called King of Ashes. It's not going to come out until July. I just got an early copy of it, but OMG. I
Yeah,
mean,
he's
it's always
another
good,
fave of mine as
but
well.
this one is just out of a hit home run, long drive, whatever the cliche sayings are, it's all of that. What
Sounds
I'm working on
wonderful,
next is a
wonderful.
1935 story about three women who gather together and form a bond, even though they are very, very different. One is a pickpocket. One is a labor union activist in Jamaica, and the other one is a very wealthy Black woman who lived in Bronzeville. And I just created the atmosphere and the backdrop for 1935 and dropped in my fictional characters based and inspired by the fabulous great dancer and choreographer Katherine Dunham, who was also an
Mm,
anthropologist out of Chicago. So, yeah, that one is the
wow.
one I have to go back to.
And when does that come out? When do you think
That
that'll
comes
come
out,
out?
I think it's the last Tuesday in February of 2026.
All right, you'll have to come back. You'll have to come back when that came out.
Yay!
Thank
Yeah.
you so much. How can our audience find you? You can find your books anywhere that books are sold and anywhere you
Well,
borrow your books. But how can they be in direct contact with you? Your
well,
website, your
go to my website and sign up for my newsletter. I send it out on a monthly basis. I won't inundate you with newsletter stuff, but I do share with my folks. So go to DennySBryce.com. That's it.
excellent,
And you
excellent.
can join the newsletter and hang out and see what I'm up to.
It sounds so wonderful. And so I hope that you will go investigate her books, buy her books, read her books, write reviews. And when you contact Denny, please tell her that you met her. And what are you reading? What are you writing? Until next week, everybody, have a great, great week. And thank you, Denny.
Thank you for having me.
Bye bye.